Wife caught cheating with police officer. What happens next? I have never liked face-to-face encounters. I solve all my problems with satisfaction but never confrontation. I am fine with this and am comfortable with it. However, as I have found out, my wife cannot understand this concept. My name is Ted Briscoe, and I have been married to Angela for 10 years. Angela is not an enthusiastic beauty with huge breasts and long blonde hair, but an ordinary brown-eyed housewife with brown hair. We have twin daughters who are still in elementary school. I work as an insurance salesman. It's not all that interesting or impressive, but I make a pretty good living, and the leftovers that are accumulating will allow me to retire. I assumed we got married because we loved each other, but now I'm not so sure about that. For the first few years, Angela seemed to be fine with everything. I guess it was a novelty to be married and have a family. We attended company and neighborhood social events with the kids whenever we could. Lately, it seemed to Angela that husbands were impressed by those with important or dynamic jobs. It didn't seem to be so much about the money as the prestige that came with the job. She wasn't like that when we married, and now it seemed to have intensified. It seemed to me that she was less and less impressed with my status in the world of work or husband. To her, my job was no cause for pride. The main problem, however, seemed to be my non-confrontational attitude when it came to problem solving. I usually solved all problems quietly and calmly, which annoyed her. She believed that a real man should meet problems face to face and win through intimidation. That was a concept I couldn't swallow. I think this is what brought me to my current dilemma. Please understand, I am not a wimp or a cuckold. I may not be a very manly man, but I will not shit on myself. I will, however, retreat from direct confrontation with the enemy. My methods sometimes seem inappropriate for a real man, but I'm more interested in results than appearance. What people think of me doesn't matter as long as I get the upper hand. To many of the things I do, a real man wouldn't stoop under any circumstances. There are things more important than pride. My wife finds that unacceptable. Today I was sitting in the car around the corner of my house. The kids had left for school, and I had left for work 20 minutes ago. I have a flexible work schedule, so leaving after hours isn't a problem as long as I get the work done in time. What I'm looking forward to doesn't happen every day, and I'm here in anticipation. I didn't drink any coffee at breakfast, so I didn't have to worry about it leaking out. After another 20 minutes, a black and white police car slowly drove down the street and stopped in my driveway. Frank Perella, one of the best cops in the city, got out of the car and waved to his partner as he pulled away. A minute later, Frank walked through my front door. You realize how difficult my situation was. How does a man with my character flaws deal with the fact that his wife is having an affair with a police officer? Who to report it to and how to validate it? I'm sure most people won't approve of my plans, but I'm not like most people and I don't live my life to please the majority. Everyone who wears glasses that show the attributes of real men will judge me. And I don't care because I want results. When I was in high school, I suffered from the same weak character traits I suffer from now. I don't think I developed them. I think I was born with them. I'm sure there is a scientific name for them, but I never bothered to look for it. Of course, I've never had any therapy or anything like that. In 5th grade, I made a good friend named Charlie Higgins. Charlie was the complete opposite of me. He was big, ugly, and always had a look on your face. He wasn't very smart, and I quickly discovered that he couldn't read. We spent a lot of time together that year, and by the time we moved into 6th grade, Charlie was reading better than anyone in the class. He always remembered the special tutoring sessions and the fact that I did it without anyone finding out. Charlie stayed by my side until we went into 10th grade. It was great because no one ever bothered me when he was around. Unfortunately, Charlie liked girls too, and by the end of the year he managed to get one of them pregnant. He dropped out of school, married the girl, and got a job as a mason's helper. Soon, Charlie became the father of a little girl. I kept tabs on Charlie, but we didn't maintain a close relationship. After Charlie left, I kept a low profile. But, as fate would have it, I became the target of a bully jock, Troy Manning, in my senior year of high school. I did everything I could to avoid him, up to and including running away. I could never beat him at anything, whether it was a physical or verbal struggle. Troy enjoyed publicly humiliating me, both in the hallways and on school grounds. Being one of the biggest athletes in the school, he received several good offers on a soccer scholarship. Like all athletes, his pride and joy was his sports jacket, which he wore every day, whether it was hot or cold. Indian ink is sold in a small square bottle with a short spout. Of course, they are indelible. I had no trouble getting a hall pass, and pouring the entire bottle of ink through the vents in Troy's locker was easy. There aren't many possibilities in such a venture, but I was successful, and the jacket became unusable for the rest of the year. Of course, jackets can't be replaced by simply going to the corner store. Poor Troy had to do without one. No one ever figured out who ruined it. Unfortunately, the harassment didn't stop, and that's when Troy started wearing his sports jersey, as I had suspected he would. It wasn't as impressive as the jacket, but he still used it to flaunt it. The first part of the installation was complete. The next day, I headed off to school with a new bottle of India ink and a sock with 3 golf balls inside. I don't like pain, but extreme measures were required to correct my injustice. Since Troy's locker was next to the boys' room, I planned to linger at the door when he discovered that his expensive sweater was also ruined. He was furious, and all the kids in the hallway couldn't help but notice his tantrum. I stood at the restroom door with a smirk on my face, hoping he would look in my direction, and sure enough, he did. He needed someone to take his rage out on, and I baited him. He stormed out, pushed me into the restroom, and pinned me against the wall. All the boys in the restroom ran out into the hallway with the rest of the crowd. He was more noise and cringe than anything else, and I was a little disappointed in his flashy attack because it meant more work for me. He didn't leave any marks on me. Hitting yourself in the head and face with a sock full of golf balls is radical, to say the least. It would have been easier to get someone to do it for me, but I was determined. It had only been a few minutes, and I was already swollen enough to realize that I was going to have 2 black eyes and a very bloody nose. Unfortunately, due to some miscalculations, I had also knocked out one of my fangs, and in such a way that it almost came out. It took a few minutes before my eyes started to go dark, which was fine. Golf balls flew out the bathroom window into the bushes below, and a torn sock went into the trash can. I stretched out on the floor in one of the stalls. A few minutes later, a student came in and found me. The school nurse decided it was best to send me to the emergency room. Not only was Troy Manning suspended from school, but he was stripped of all scholarships. My tooth healed normally, and my face was completely healed by the time we were supposed to take graduation pictures. No one contacted me for the rest of the year. Troy, of course, denied everything. Frank Perella became my new Troy Manning. 2 hours later, a black and white car pulled up in front of the house. Frank stepped out of the driveway, and I watched my loving wife kiss him goodbye. She was wearing a robe. I waited about 5 minutes and went into the house. The shower, as I suspected, was already running. The bed was still a mess, and her clothes were lying on the floor. Next to the nightstand was a wastebasket with a light blue plastic bag in it. Inside the plastic bag were 2 used contraceptives, neatly tied. At least she was practicing safe sex. That was all I needed. I quietly left the house and headed to work. When I got back from work in the evening, I went into the garage and pulled a blue bag out of the trash can. I put the 2 contraceptives in the Ziploc bag and put it on the workbench where I was sure Angela wouldn't find it. By this time, all the swimmers were dead, but the DNA continued to live on. By the end of the second week, I had 10 completed contraceptives. It was time for the next step in my plan. Frank never came to the house on Fridays. I found out that on this day he was visiting his mother in a nursing home downtown. His partner would drop him off at 10 a.m. and pick him up around 11 a.m. I had several clients in the building, and it was no problem to set up an appointment with one of them. Old people all look forward to seeing a company, even if it's an insurance agent. The nursing home had a security camera at the entrance to the underground parking garage, but it was the only one. Very few residents of the home drove, so most of the cars that used the garage were visitors of some kind. One afternoon, I took a long lunch and went out on the freeway. There were several adult video stores by the entrance ramps. The first two had only videos and the third had toys as well. For $20, I bought a set of beads. I asked the salesman if he had any recommendations, and he said to use a lot of lubricant. That seemed like a good idea to me. A pickle injector and a foot-long piece of aquarium tubing completed my shopping list. I was ready to go. Angela grew more sullen by the day. Her contempt for me steadily grew. Wednesday morning was important to my plan. I usually avoided her taunts and teasing, but today I responded. As I was finishing breakfast, she snidely remarked that I was no longer having sex with her. She made a few put-downs about my manhood. It was the moment I was looking for. I'm sorry, darling. Even though your lover uses contraceptives, I still don't want to risk contracting any STDs. I hope you can understand me. She stood with her usual smirk on her face and just looked at me. Only in the last few months had she looked at me like that. She didn't say anything, as if daring me to say more. I don't think you realize the gravity of the situation you're in. The smirk on her face suddenly disappeared. She began to fidget slightly and her gaze darted around the room. Now she didn't know what to do. As I started to walk out the door, I turned and said, "He can't protect you forever." As I walked away, I noticed the slight fear. It worked perfectly. When I arrived at work, there was a police car parked by my rear bumper. I was sitting in the car with the window open when Frank Perella approached me. He leaned against my car door and gave me the meanest face he was capable of. "Who do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I'd advise you to mind your own business and keep your mouth shut. If you make one more smart-ass remark about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good stretch in Graterford. I'm sure some of the guys there would love to have you as a cellmate. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir. Perfectly." He gave me one of those cocky smirks and walked back toward the cruiser. I was sure Angela would call him after I left the house and hoped he'd stop me. I turned off the recorder and headed to work. It had been a good day. Dinner in the evening was very quiet. The girls and I chatted a bit, but Angela hardly said a word. The smile of confident arrogance that had been on her face was gone. Every time I caught her eye, she quickly averted her eyes. She avoided eye contact at all costs. Until today, she had been looking at me with mild disdain. I hadn't even started my plan yet, and she was already starting to become wary. She may not like me anymore, but she seemed to recognize me. The uncertain future made her feel very uncomfortable. I don't think there was anything Frank could have said to make it go away. Thursday, I spent all day preparing for the big day. I found the nearest hospital emergency room and wrote down my lawyer's number on speed dial. A bit of rough sandpaper applied a deadly surface to the beads. I collected labs from each contraceptive and placed it in a small medicine bottle. I attached a tube to the pickle injector so it wouldn't detach. Everything was carefully thought out, and I went over the scenario hundreds of times to make sure everything was perfect. That night, Angela slept with the girls. I didn't bother to ask why. The hardest part of my plan was introducing the beads. I gave them a good working over and then shoved them as far into my rectum as I could. Inserting them was very painful, and I couldn't wait to get them out. I inserted them just before I left the house. 4 hours later, I was going to be in a lot of pain. It was about 10 when the cruiser dropped Frank off near the elevator at the nursing home. A few minutes later, I took the same elevator up to Martha Forbush. Martha was 70 and enjoyed keeping company. I spent about 20 minutes with her and then quietly left. She knows I was at her place, but her idea of the time is a little confused. It was a painful visit because I had to sit with those damn beads inside. Once in the car, I tore my coat slightly, as well as a couple of belt loops in the seam on my pants. I kept a close eye on the time. Frank seemed to be a punctual guy. I refilled the injector with his labs from the medicine bottle, some left over, so I reached back and smeared it on my boxers and shirt tail. Right on time, Frank stepped off the elevator, and a minute later a black and white car picked him up. Now came the pain. I grasped the cord of the beads and yanked as if it were a Band-Aid. It was very uncomfortable, but I was relieved to pull it out. The pickle injector turned out to be a good choice. Slipping the tube in, I shook the entire load inside. Walking out the backside of the parking lot, I dumped all my supplies down the storm drain. Why would anyone want to watch? Looking as shocked and unkempt as possible, I piled into the emergency room of St. Joseph's Hospital and announced to the world that I had been used. Immediately, a call was made to the police and the crisis center for victims of use. I was taken to an exam room where my clothes were stripped and packed away. An internal examination revealed an injury to my rectum. I was worried I might have overanalyzed Frank, but was afraid I might lose some of it going to the hospital. They found evidence on my clothes. The doctor was convinced that I had indeed been used and left me with the lab technician. About this time, the police and a representative from Victim Services for Victims of Use arrived. They asked the lab technician to leave for a while and then spent 30 minutes getting information from me. When I said that, I thought my pest might be a police officer. The room went quiet. Since all government employees register their DNA for exclusionary purposes, the woman in the anti-utilization department assured me that they would have a positive identification within 24 hours. She was confident that all police officers would be exonerated by then. The hospital informed Angela of what had happened and asked her to bring clothes for me to the hospital. She delivered the clothes but didn't bother to look in on me or inquire about my condition. After the police left, the lab technician returned. She was a young girl of about 25. She had straight blonde hair and a very light complexion with freckles. "My name is Ted. I'm sorry we haven't been introduced. They call me Jilly. My real name is Jillian." She looked at me strangely, smiling slightly. I watched her fill out the forms and spread out the samples for whatever they were doing with them. "Jilly, who gets a copy of the DNA report?" "The police." "That's it?" "The lab provides certified copies to anyone who wants or needs one." "Why?" "Sign me up for a copy and my attorney, please." "Sure, no problem. Anything else?" "What are you doing with the remaining samples? You know, the surplus ones." "We usually just throw them away. Why?" "Can you label or certify the leftover samples and then keep them?" "Sure. We have a secure storage facility, and we can make sure the samples aren't compromised." "I think I've fallen in love with you, Jilly. Can you do all this for me?" By this time, I was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed. Jilly sat down next to me and smiled. "I can take care of everything for you and more if you promise to buy me dinner." "I'm married." "I know, but I bet you won't be married much longer." "What's the point of all this? I'm not Brad Pitt. Why are you interested in having dinner with me?" "I think you're a very intelligent man, and I'd like to get to know you better. I think I know what you did tonight, but I don't know exactly how. If you buy me dinner tonight, my lips will be on lock." That wasn't part of my plans. I didn't allow for that possibility, but I liked this girl. "Meet me at the Outback at 7. "That's a date. Can I call you a cab so you can go home?" "Your wife left half an hour ago." "My car is in the garage across the street. I think I can make it. I'll see you at 7. Except for the unexpected conversation with Jilly, everything went just as I'd planned. The next few days would be exciting. When I got home, Angela was sitting in the living room. "Thanks for bringing my clothes to the hospital. I'd love a ride." "I'm sorry. I didn't know how long you'd be here, and I wanted to be here when the girls got home from school." I went upstairs to take a shower. "Oh, by the way, I'm fine. Nothing to worry about. Thanks for asking." Angela was still sitting in the same pose when I came downstairs. She looked at me, but didn't say anything. The arrogant smirk was gone. It was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Dinner was 3 hours away. I decided to go for a drive. When I drove out of the house, the girls were just coming back from school. How my body ached. Dinner went well. Although it was quiet and peaceful, I had a great time. Jilly and I were like cat and mouse. I didn't admit to anything, and she didn't tell me about her suspicions. She had been raised by her mother and had never had a man or father in her life. I got the impression that she didn't trust men and didn't socialize with them at all. It was an hour before we ordered our food, and we ate flowering onions. We spent the entire evening repeating each other. She told me how smart I was, and I told her how insightful she was. We sat there for over 2 hours, talking constantly but never saying anything. It was wonderful, but only a twisted mind can comprehend the joy of it. We promised to meet up Monday night. When I got home, I found Angela sleeping with the girls again. I had provided for her and given her everything. She had given up everything and now seemed to not know what to do. Frank was married and had a family of his own. He would leave her in a second, and she knew it. She also knew that I would never take her back. Angela was caught in the middle, and it was making her miserable. I had once loved her, but now there was no love or pity in her. I truly believed she was afraid of me. Maybe Frank would protect her. I left home early Sunday morning and stayed out all day. I found all sorts of ways to kill time without spending a lot of money. When I got home around 6, I found the house empty. Angela had left me a note. She had taken the girls and gone to her parents' house in Tennessee. There was no mention of when she might return. Most of their clothes were gone. Looks like she was planning on staying for a long time. I guess I was relieved. I stopped by Seymour Schlump's office first thing in the morning. Seymour was a little slick, but as a lawyer, I liked him. He'd already gotten the DNA results from the lab in the overnight mail. I think it was Jilly's idea. There was no doubt about it. My pest was Frank Perella. I explained to Seymour why a copy of the test results had been sent to him. He said it was a great idea under the circumstances. I gave him a copy of the tape of Officer Perella threatening me. I told him about the affair Perella was having with my wife and gave him the times and dates. At 10 o'clock, Seymour and I were in the DA's office. 2 imposing men with folders and clipboards entered the room. After introductions, they began to explain that they would not be able to proceed with the case due to lack of DNA evidence. Seymour started laughing, and I had a hard time keeping a straight face. Gentlemen, under the circumstances, we assumed that the DNA results might be missing, so we sent some duplicates. I know it's a bit unusual, but it seems worth the effort, don't you think? I think it's important to see to it that justice is served, don't you? Seymour handed 2 copies of the DNA results across the table to the men who were supposed to represent me. The original was filed with the court at 9 this morning. These are just working copies. I was afraid the original would get lost again. Seymour was good. That's why I hired him. The district attorney and his assistant sighed and leaned back in their chairs. You knew it was Frank Perella before we even entered this room, didn't you? Neither of them answered the question. After a few seconds, the prosecutor spoke up. Why would Frank Perella, a respected and decorated officer, do this? I'm sorry, but it's unthinkable. Seymour smiled from ear to ear. Officer Perella was having an affair with Mr. Briscoe's wife, Angela. It went on for several months. His partner can attest to that. When Mr. Briscoe confronted his wife and asked her to stop, she immediately told Frank Perella about it. Officer Perella and his partner pulled Mr. Briscoe over in his patrol car, and Officer Perella threatened to send Mr. Briscoe to jail if he did not drop the subject. The district attorney leaned back in his chair and smiled. That's the biggest pile of nonsense I ever heard. There's no way you can convince me or a jury that it even happened. Finally, I had had enough of this. I raised my hand toward Seymour, signaling that I wanted to talk. I leaned across the table and looked the prosecutor straight in the eye. You're supposed to be on my side. This is the second time in 10 minutes you've insinuated that I'm a liar. If you do it one more time, I will sue you and the city with tons and tons of media coverage. Sit here, shut up and listen. When the tape ends, I expect an apology from both of you." I pressed the play button on my recorder. Seymour leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Who the hell do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I'd advise you to keep your nose out of it and keep your mouth shut. If you make one more smart-ass remark about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good stretch in Graterford. I'm sure some of the guys there would love to have you as a cellmate. Do I make myself clear?" I leaned back in my chair and let Seymour take over. "Do you recognize Frank Perella's voice, or do we need an expert to verify it? Maybe Internal Affairs will take an interest in this case." Both gentlemen immediately apologized. Seymour and I apologized and got up to leave. "Call me when you get your thoughts together and we'll talk again." Seymour was good. "Also, before the end of the day, I'd like to get a restraining order to keep all uniformed police officers away from Mr. Briscoe. It looks like the situation is ripe for revenge." The two policemen just sat there and watched us walk away. Jilly and I had a great time at the Olive Garden that night. She wanted me to go back to her place for the night, but I chickened out. "Maybe next time," I told her. Somehow the whole story made it into the local paper. They didn't bother to hide the names of everyone involved, including Angela. It didn't matter much since she wasn't there, and I doubted she'd ever come back. However, it did matter to Frank Perella's wife and his two brothers-in-law. Frank was beating all the trash out of Frank, and he wouldn't say who did it. I always wondered if they beat him up for cheating or for having sex with a man. Either way, the result was the same. Things didn't go well for Frank. Eventually, he was forced to plead guilty. He got 5 years but avoided a publicity stunt in court. He was to serve his time in prison, that is, at Graterford West. That's where they sent criminals and bad cops. Frank would have been in a lot of trouble in normal life. Which brings me to my old friend Charlie. Not long ago, some idiot hit on Charlie's wife and he ended up in the hospital. Charlie ended up doing time at GW because they had a masonry school. He spent 2 years in soft custody teaching a bunch of cons how to lay bricks and blocks. I visited Charlie's wife, Josie. Their daughter, Sarah, had graduated from high school and had been accepted to dental hygienist school in Boyertown. The only problem was that she had to pay $6,000 in tuition. Since Charlie was in prison, the family had to depend on Josie's income. I knew all this in advance, so I came prepared. I gave Josie a check for the tuition and a sealed envelope. I asked her to give the envelope to Charlie the next time she came to visit. Seymour prepared and mailed the divorce papers to Angela at her parents' home in Bristol. I granted her custody of the children and monthly payments, but no alimony. Her infidelity was well documented, and Seymour had made all the provisions. Jilly and I discussed the possibility of me trying to get custody, but both agreed that I was too unstable to be an effective father. I got along well with both daughters, and sometimes I felt I was closer to them than their mother. Jilly and I were soulmates. Wow, that's deep. She's the only girl I felt comfortable with. I didn't tell her all my secrets, and she didn't tell me hers, but we somehow bonded. With Angela gone and soon to be out of my life forever, I had no qualms about sleeping with Jilly. She moved into the house with me. The house was rented, so that shouldn't have been a problem in the divorce. She wasn't much of a cook, but she was good at almost everything else. We went out to dinner a lot. There was a kind of mysterious atmosphere about Jilly. I would find out more about that later. Angela signed and returned the papers almost immediately. She didn't ask for anything or even hire a lawyer. In 3 months, I'll be free. I didn't need to stay here until the end. Jilly and I spent a lot of time talking about the possibilities of moving. We wanted it to be a little warmer, but not too much. We decided that no snow would be nice, but we still wanted to have 4 seasons. Getting a transfer at my company wouldn't be difficult. Jilly could get a job almost anywhere. Huntsville, Alabama seemed like the perfect place for us. It was close to Nashville and Chattanooga, and the taxes were excellent. You could buy a nice house for half the price compared to most other places. We both put in our notice and started preparing. Before we left, I learned that Frank Perella had been brutally beaten in a kitchen pantry in Greaterford West. The authorities suggested that it was some sort of retaliation by inmates with whom he had previously socialized. He was kicked in the groin so hard that his bladder was permanently damaged. I received a nice letter from Charlie thanking me for the help I gave Sarah. He also thanked me for Josie. I hadn't said anything to Charlie, but Seymour was working on getting him a reduced sentence. Up until that point, everything had gone according to plan. We weren't expecting a phone call from Angela's parents.
Ted, this is Mary, Angela's mother. I'm sorry to bother you, but we need help.
What kind of help? What's the matter?
Angela doesn't take care of the girls. She won't even go near them. She claims they're demons and are mad at her because of what she did to you.
That doesn't sound normal.
She refuses to tell us exactly what she did to you that they're upset about. In fact, she pretty much refuses to talk about anything. We really need your help.
Is she otherwise okay?
Number. She sits in her room all day with the door locked. I have to bring her food. She seems to be afraid of her own daughters.
What do you want me to do?
You have to come and get the girls. We can take care of Angela, but not the girls.
Okay, we'll be driving through Bristol on Saturday. We'll stop and pick them up. Have everything you need ready.
Thank you, Ted. We appreciate it. I explained to Jilly that I wasn't fit to be a parent. With my quirky personality traits, the girls would grow up to be just as abnormal as I was. I looked normal on the outside, but I was far from it on the inside. It wasn't fair to subject two innocent girls to such an environment. After a few hours, she decided we should give it a try. Jilly would be a stay-at-home mom. Somehow I felt like that was what she was expecting. We rented a small house west of Huntsville for a year. The internet is a great invention. Furniture and things were brought in shortly after we arrived. Bristol was just down the road. Jilly was nervous about meeting the girls. I was nervous about having to see Angela. However, things didn't work out as expected. I didn't tell Jilly that my daughters were a little unusual. They were not ordinary little girls, just as their father was not an ordinary man. I tried to ignore it, but I was always aware of it. Angela's parents greeted us with a sigh of relief. We entered the house, and upon seeing me, Angela immediately ran to her room and locked the door. I guess I was worried for nothing. I decided to leave it at that. Jilly was standing in the living room when my two daughters walked up to her. They looked at each other for a few seconds, and then a wide grin appeared on the faces of all three of them. It looked to me like they were having some kind of private joke, and I was left out. However, I was very pleased with the first meeting. The girls walked over to Jilly, and each of them put their arms around her legs, something they had never done with their mother. Jilly placed her hands on each of their heads and smiled. "Jilly, meet my daughters Lilith and Sybil." I got the strange feeling that no introduction was necessary. I think the next few years of my life are going to be very interesting. Lilith is a demon of the night from the Babylonian Talmud. Sibylla, a woman endowed with the spirit of prophecy in the ancient Romans and Greeks. Jilly is a cute little red-headed girl. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you!